Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're in round number 3 of the 2019 U.S. Chess Championship held in St. Louis, going to be happening for the next few weeks. Our competitors today, White's going to be played by Nakamura. Many of you familiar, he plays in all the big tournaments, the third highest rated American, partly just because we have some really talented American chess players with Fabiano Caruana and also Wesley So sitting atop above Nakamura. His competitor playing the black pieces is Sevian. We watched this 18-year-old play yesterday and get the victory. He currently sits atop the standings, only 2 days in, but he's no stranger to beating some top competition. In 2015, so 4 years ago, when he was just a young lad, he beat Wesley So. So this is definitely his for the taking if he wants it. But he does have a challenge in front of him. He's playing the black pieces against one of the strongest Americans. So we'll go ahead and get started with Nakamura. Pawn to c4, the English opening. Pawn to e5. Think of it as the reverse Sicilian if you're not familiar with the English opening. Knight c3, knight f6. Both sides decide to go into the 4 knights variation. And then pawn to e4. So you can be pretty aggressive pawn to e4. If you wanted to be a little slower, you could always play pawn to e3, stopping the bishop coming down here to b4. Nakamura decides to go ahead and play pawn e4. Now bishop down, b4, pinning down the knights. Decides to go ahead and play pawn to d3. Not too worried about the bishop taking right here. Now pawn to d6, just solidifying the pawn chain. Pawn to a3. And then the bishop comes back here to c5. If after pawn to d3, let's say the bishop takes here on c3, White's going to have a pretty solid pawn chain. You have all these pawns in the center of the board. Maybe castle on the king side, bishop e2, d6. This isn't terrible for White. So Nakamura didn't really mind if this happened in the game or not. But after the bishop comes back here, we see pawn up to b4, forcing the bishop to come back. Bishop here to b6, and then knight a4, attacking the bishop here on b6. Black continues bringing his light square bishop involved to the game with bishop to g4. Thought he may try to bring his bishop down to d4. Really just keep this knight on a4 exactly where it is. You don't want to give him an easy square to come to. You want to keep your opponent's pieces in bad positions, and definitely the knights here on the A or the H file are not good positions. And now if Nakamura wants to exchange, I think this is a great outpost for this knight in the center of the board. Yes, White has the bishop pair, but he can have the bishop pair later on if he wants to. If he leads his bishop here on b6, he's just going to lose his own bishop. But this does start to clog up the center of the board, so the bishops don't mean as much as far as the bishop pair. But in the game, we see the bishop come back here after knight to a4, then bishop down to g4, pinning down the knights. Bishop to e2, both stopping the threat of the pin, as well as getting ready to castle on the king side. Knight coming back to d7, and then the knight takes on b6. So yes, the knight came back here. It is not there to protect. It would be a mistake to go ahead and take with the knight right here, because then the knight could take here on e5, and then after the knight takes, we could see the bishop take. Knight take, and then the queen recaptures. You can see White's going to be up in material. So not exactly what Sam would be going for. So instead in the game, after the knight takes, we are going to see the pawn recapture here on b6. So it does have double pawns on the b file, and White still has that bishop pair. So that's what I say, if he's going to have it anyway, I feel like getting a nice little outpost here on d4 makes a lot of sense. Now Nakamura plays bishop to b2, just trying to control the dark square diagonals. Castle on the king side, pawn h3, forcing the light square bishop to move. Decides to go ahead and take here in exchange. Now the knight comes down to d4, the great little outpost. Nakamura says, yeah, I'm not going to hold on to my bishop pair. It's starting to get closed up in the center, so doesn't even know that the bishop pair is going to matter as much. So castle on the king side, we do see the exchange here on f3. and then the queen comes down to g5. So it's equal in material, both from a material standpoint, but then also you could see black does have double pawns here, so not as great, but he has the better minor piece in my opinion. The knight can just move all over the board, especially in a closed position. Both sides have pretty safe kings. There is one semi-open file that this rook here can attack. No semi-open files for the white rook. So no real clear attack for either side here. This backward pawn eventually someone could attack, but no clear attack for either side. So as we continue, rook to e1, just centralizing. Knight coming back to b8, pretty much as I'm going to come back here to start pushing forward with c6. Anytime you see your opponent retreat material back, especially the minor pieces, that usually means it's a good time to strike if you have a good attack. And that's exactly what Nakamura does. He senses a little bit of weakness and he starts pushing forward. Pawn d4. Now knight to c6, but we can start to see some exchange from Nakamura. So after the pawn takes, then we see rook here to d1. Before, white did not have an open file to attack with the rooks. Now he absolutely has that. So controls the center of the board. Rook to d8, and then a rook up here to d5. Says, yeah, if you want to exchange, I'm now going to control this with my pawns. After the rook takes, decides to go ahead and take with his c pawn. He could also take here. This does have a pretty solid pawn structure, but really wanted to hold on to two central pawns. So decided to go ahead and take with his c pawn, forcing the knight to move. Knight comes down here to d4. This is fine with Nakamura. He exchanges, and now this pawn completely isolated. Yes, it is a passed pawn, but it's going to be so difficult to hold on to. The only piece that he can really control it with is the queen here. Decides to go ahead and try with his pawns after queen to d3. Plays pawn c5, but yeah, it's just too little to really try to hold on to it. Nakamura does play en passant, so for those not familiar with en passant, you can actually take like this. You have one move, and one move only after your opponent moves 2 squares here. So it is capture. After the pawn recaptures, the Nakamura takes the pawn. Getting into the endgame, Nakamura against an opponent that is definitely inferior to his playing skill, getting into that with a pawn advantage. Huge benefits for Nakamura. Pawn to c5, we do see the queen to come up here to d6, attacking both the pawns here, and also just preparing for an attack on the king. You have the constant threat of the back rank mate. If you're not familiar exactly what that means, if the rook were to come down and take on a3, this is going to be checkmate. Queen to b8, nowhere for the king to move. The rook is completely out of the picture. The only way to stop it, queen to d8, but then it's going to be checkmate right away. So yes, this queen does come up. There's a lot of different things that it's doing. So yes, adding more and more pressure, but it also just stops this rook here on a8 from doing anything. Sam plays pawn taking on b4. Pawn recaptures. Queen over here to b5, attacking the pawn. But then rook over here to c1. Doesn't have to worry too much because the queen here on d6 is still defending this pawn here on b4. So pawn to h6, if you look at it and say, how does black really get out of this? He wants to get his rook involved into the game. He wants to maybe double attack here on this pawn b4, but as soon as he moves his rook, he knows it's going to be lights out. So he needs to make sure that if his opponent puts him in check, he can move his king. So that's what he does. Pawn to h6, but this really takes a move off. He no longer is developing or figuring out the best way to put these major pieces into play. Nakamura can just continue with his plan, putting his pieces together for the best attack. Queen to c6, queen comes back a6, pushing forward pawn to b5, stopping both the pawn from pushing as well as continuing to attack the queen. Queen out here to a5, rook to d1, just getting ready to push if it needs to. Rook to b8, king up here to h2, queen down to a2. That's just not what the game is about. Yes, you're attacking the pawn here on f2, but really needs to just figure out how to defend correctly. Queen to c7, threatening, obviously taking the rook here on b8. really has to bring his queen back here. Sort of a wasted move here, attacking on a2. Now rook to d7. You've heard me in many videos. Getting your rook to your opponent's 7th rank if you're white, or if you're black, bring it down here to the 2nd rank. It's exactly where you want to be. If you have a queen supporting you as well, things are pretty deadly. You can see right away that they are attacking this f8 or f7 square, and from there it's pretty much all going to be over. So rook to f8, but now Sam's just in complete defense mode. His rook is no longer going to be involved in any sort of attack here. We see the queen take on b6. The queen takes on e4, and then my favorite move of the game so far, and that is queen to d6. It seems subtle, it's just centralizing, but it does so much. One, it opens up the door for the pawn to start pushing. As soon as it comes to b6, it's protected by the queen. It comes here to b7, it's protected by the rook. And if it comes here to b8, it's protected by the queen. This queen here also is attacking and defending this entire diagonal right here. So if the rook were to ever come here to b8, can't do that, it's being under attack. And really what Sam wants to do is find a way to check his opponent, but he can't do that. Really, he just is working with this dark square diagonal. This queen here on d6 is locking that up. So this simple little move here, just centralizing, is doing so much for Nakamura in the endgame. Queen comes back here to e6. Nakamura says, yeah, that's fine. We'll go ahead and exchange. I'm up a pawn in material. When you get down to the end game, if you're up, it's okay to exchange because your advantage just becomes that more pronounced in the game. So pawn to b6 has the passed pawn. Number one thing to do with the passed pawn is continue to push it. King to h7. Pawn up here to b7. Pretty much have to just think about how I'm going to defend this. King to g6. Rook over here to c7. Rook to b8, just trying to stop that. Does not want Nakamura to play rook to c8. That is the threat that he is stopping there. King to g3, and now it's this tough position because black really wants to keep white from getting his king over to the queen side of the board. He's going to have to do that with something like king to f5, but as soon as he moves king to f5, he's going to lose this pawn here on g7. But if he doesn't, if he plays king to f6, well, then he has to worry about his opponent playing king to f4, and then maybe he can attack it with his pawns, but then the king's just going to start going over to the queen side of the board. This is not going to be a winning strategy for Sam. Not that there's too much he can do in this spot, but he decides to go ahead and play king to f5, give up the pawn here on g7, rook to d8, pawn here to f3, and then we see a series of moves. But at the end, you could see that there's just no way to stop Nakamura in the game. And so after a while, Nakamura then plays rook to c6. And in this spot, Sam resigns. So Nakamura, had 2 draws coming into this, but still played extremely strong. Had some tough competitors in the first 2 rounds. Goes up against the man at the top after 2 rounds. I recognize that, but takes a victory from him, so that puts him in a good spot in the tournament. Sam, on the other hand, had a great tournament. First round, he tied Fabiano, and then the second round, he did get a victory, and thought he played extremely well in this game. A few minor calculations on his end. Ended up being down a pawn, and just can't do that getting into the end game against Nakamura. Guy just does not make mistakes. So hopefully you guys enjoyed round number 3 and enjoying the tournament as well. We will be back again tomorrow for round number 4. Thanks for watching.